Hey, I'm Chris, and welcome to the VR UX Design 101 series. Today I'm joined by Roger and Dennis. They are the creators of the Virtual Physics Hand Lab app from Holonautic. Is that how you say it?
Holonautic.
Yes,
Holonautic, yeah.
exactly.
And welcome, gentlemen. I'm excited. We're going to have a really good conversation today.
Very excited too to especially talk about UX and UI design in VR. I think it's a topic which has not been covered enough, and we are very happy that you started the series on that because there's so many things still to learn and explore.
Exactly. And I just want to get right to it. So your application, your experience, your physics sandbox, all of the above. I recently tried it, and it was, to me, something that felt like, this is where hand tracking has come. It's come quite a long ways. In 2016, I used to work for a medical VR company wherein we would use Leap Motion and the Oculus Rift to sort of sell to doctors. And every time, sell this medical VR software to doctors. And every time the doctors, when we were like in the showroom showing them the software, whenever we showed off the Leap Motion and they saw their hands, it was like it's this immediate like spark lightning. It was a spark. They would just all of a sudden they would have this instant reaction because they would be like, oh my god, this is my hands and I can move them, and it's crazy, and like anything I've ever seen before. Fast forward to 2020, here I am, and I'm going through your experience, and I'm cutting off my hand. I'm playing around with the sizes of my left and my right hand, and it's going from like cutting off my hand jarring to seeing the size of my hands being big or small, really weird, to doing the force push of the objects and feeling really powerful. And so there's just this wide range of emotions and feelings that you're giving me here. And I'm curious to know, like, what drove you? What sort of made you want to like include certain experiences over the others? Like, can you talk a bit about that?
Well, I think we both had the same reaction when we first tried hand tracking that you had when you tried Leap Motion. Actually, we tried the Oculus hand tracking first, and we had that exact same thing. Like, whoa, that increases immersion by a tenfold compared to just having controllers and not seeing really your finger move except when you press buttons. But as soon as you really like see your hands and they move exactly how you feel they move, because when you move your finger, when you don't see them, you can feel, okay, they're moving. And when you can see that those fingers which are moving map exactly to what you feel they do, the immersion is really much better. And yeah, of course, they're just ghost hands, and as soon as you want to interact with stuff, you can see, okay, that something is wrong, it's not really there. So at some point, it somehow also breaks the immersion. But if you add on top of that physics using like realistic collisions, that when you press on an object which is like heavy or like a static table, and you see, okay, my fingers are bending backwards, that adds another layer of immersion. You're like, whoa, I really have the feeling now VR is like the real world.
Yeah.
And up to some level, you can really extend that because there is, there is proprioception, which basically tells you in your space where your hands are. Somehow, even when you don't see your hands, okay, my hands is more or less here. I'm opening my hand or not. And when you can like fake that in VR, that your hand is not exactly where it is in real life, but you see that your hands react physically to that environment. Then your brain will automatically like compute that together and think, okay, that's my real hand, even though it's not exactly where it is, and I'm not touching something for real. But when you can see your finger bending backwards, you have some kind of fake feedback happening in your mind, and that really, we discovered that, and that was really something cool. And then building on top of that made a lot of sense.
Wow. And I also noticed that you not only were you, because one of the things that it definitely feels where in like, for example, like you're using also audio to compensate for the lack of tactile feedback. So it's not just physics, but it's also audio. And perhaps you can talk a little bit more about how you incorporated audio in there to make up for that as well.
Well, I think the audio part is still something where it's very rudimentary. We plan to add much more audible feedback. Because, yeah, the thing is in VR, especially with the three-dimensional space, right, where we can hear something on the right of you and you actually can have a way better spatial awareness. Audio feedback, when it comes to UX and UI design, is very important. Especially if you don't have the haptic feedbacks on the controllers, right, when you have pure hand tracking. It's very important to give some kind of sense of presence with helping of the audio system which you can use. And especially like, spatial audio is probably one of the most underappreciated things in VR development because it's really hard to make it right and not obnoxious and, integrated with UX design. But it adds tremendous value if it's done right.
Wow. And so just a quick note, gentlemen, while I know this is weird, but I want to make sure that the audio is super perfect. While one of you guys is completely like just talking, one of you, perhaps there's a mute button. Go ahead and mute yourself really quick because there's still a little bit of echo coming through the other person, even though you're using, it's a lot better than before, but there's still a little bit. And so you know how YouTube people are. Perfect. So thank you so much. Let me ask you about sort of like your design process in ideation through iteration. Like, what was it to come up with an idea and then prototype it and see it in VR in practice and realize, oh, this was nice on paper, but in practice, not so much. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we actually made a class about that where, I don't know if maybe you're aware of it, we made a master class about not only hand tracking interaction, but like how to build UI and UX experiences for VR especially, because you cannot just like adapt and like port what was done for normal PC or mobile user interfaces to VR, but you actually need to think different. You really need to like come up with new ideas and always test them into VR to see, okay, does it actually feel good? Does it actually make sense? Would people actually make the effort to go into VR to do those interactions, or will it just be like a gimmick and cumbersome and it's actually more optimized to just do that on a PC or on a mobile? Does it actually make sense to do that in VR? So maybe Roger, you want to talk a little bit more about that, like how we actually iterate and prototype and come up with potentially new concepts?
We discovered very early on that most of the ideas you come up with on a whiteboard, right, when you sketch out ideas and you imagine it, how it would be in your imagination, like how it would feel in VR, and then you build a small prototype for maybe, a few days or sometimes a week or two until you have all the puzzle pieces together. And then you try it and you're so disappointed where all the things which sounded so amazing in your head, and when you visualized it and when you thought about those superpowers and those things which you could do, you build it and then it doesn't feel good, or you get immediately motion sick, which is one of the biggest problems. And you have to go completely back to the drawing board and come up maybe with a completely different idea. And we went in the beginning, when we started the company, through multiple months of just iterating of multiple ideas. And we were sometimes lucky where the first initial prototype like worked out really well. And sometimes we were really unlucky where just no matter what we tried to add, it just never felt right, because you have to think different in VR and it's very hard. So we have actually developed some kind of system where we always say, okay, we come up with an idea, we build a small prototype, and we actually have to add in that prototype already sufficient visuals, also visual feedback, audio feedback. Like a lot of things have to be there to be able to judge a prototype in VR before you can say, okay, it's really not working. Because sometimes it's just the small things which just add that little bit of magic to make it feel awesome. So you have to be very careful to design those things already in a very early prototype stage, with all the senses involved to be really able to judge it. And so we usually have an iterate and then we test it with not just us, but also like externals, which have not that much experience in VR. And then we often just kill it. The majority of applications we build or prototypes we developed, we killed, and only very few of those prototypes actually make it up to a second test iteration where we go further and we test it with more people and then see if it still clicks, if the majority of them enjoy it. And then we go further and invest heavily into actually developing into a full-blown experience.
Wow,
And I think that is something which you have to learn when you work in the spatial computing domain, at least how it is now, that the first few months you will make mistakes. And you should not be afraid of making mistakes, because the book has not been written. The golden rules of design and what makes fun and what is problematic is not there yet. We still have to, figure out new ways. For example, HPL has done many things which we haven't seen before, at least, in using hands and physics in a combination which gives a completely new experience. And basically it was uncharted territory. We didn't know what will work and what would work. So you really have to iterate and keep it small, make it simple. Even big studios like Valve also say that they build small prototypes, like small rooms. They get to design like one experience, and then they test it multiple times for iterations until they have that room finished, and then move on to the next small experience, and then they build a whole game on that. But always keeping it small and also throwing it away and killing a lot of experiences when they just don't work out as you initially had it in mind.
Well, I really did. I really dig the rapid iteration approach. Can you perhaps provide a specific example of one thing that you really, really wanted or really thought it would work out, but in the end it just sort of didn't?
Which one of those? Well, there's a lot of where we got inspiration from existing experiences, like somewhere where you have to management of multiple things happening in the same time, and you wanted to basically create a stressful environment for the user, and we built multiple small experiences and then try to bundle them together into a more fun experience where you had multiple things to take care of with time management and figuring out what to do at what time, that you manage to keep everything alive. And what we experienced was that it's just stressful, and because of the limited overview you have in VR, it gets it's not fun to be so much under stress and not knowing what's going on. Very different from like if you have a top-down perspective, right? If you have a lot of things going on, you have an overview, it's fine. But in VR, because you're so in first person in most experiences, it's really hard to not lose track of things, and it's not fun to be frustrated and not being able to keep up with stuff. And that's basically what one of the experiences we built was not as exciting as we initially thought it would be when we actually combined the different experiences, which were fun on its own, but as soon as we merged them together, they actually fall apart and each one became less fun than the individual ones.
Wow.
Now, Dennis, do you remember what was the disappointment you had?
Well, we also learned that we tried very early on to reproduce some kind of melee combat, because in VR it's really fun that you are able first to shoot guns, but also do melee combat, and of course that in a physics-based manner. And the first iteration of melee combat, it was in first person, but we discover if you have multiple enemies, you need to fight at the same time, and like some are coming from behind, or because you have that limited field of view of first being in first person, but more limited because of VR having a limited field of view, which is even more reduced. Then we started to experiment more, and we wanted also to have some kind of god game. And then we came up with the concept of what about combining both, that you can do some kind of melee combat and interactions, but from an out-of-body perspective. And that basically solved another problem we had, which is that limited field of view. So you could basically see your whole surroundings, but still interact by basically incarnating yourself, but from an out-of-body perspective, and then you had a lot more freedom and overview on what was going on. Maybe you heard about it. It's Holoception, and one of the other big projects we are basically working on, and we're trying to port it to as many platforms as we can. And that was really then something that we wanted to push further, because it was really trying to do something different, like a new perspective for a game in VR, and that's really what we like to do, is to try to do something different and really explore how can that come up with new interaction system, new ways to do stuff, new ways to move around. We also have a smooth locomotion system, but because you're zoomed out from yourself, so you move a lot slower, even though yourself or your character is running around and jumping, because you're not really inside the body. You have different way to do stuff in VR. We can really interact differently. And that really allowed us to really think out of the box and come up with new interactions and new way to do stuff. And that was also the base ground of learning a lot about physics-based interaction and combat, because the whole body was physics-based. the legs could move, everything would interact with the rest of the world. And then after that, of course, adding physics-based interaction to hand tracking made a lot of sense, because you also could have somehow that perspective game you could do by not really having your real body exactly where it is, but you see something different. But your virtual body was interacting with the environment, and for that you feel a lot more immersed. And then we continued iterating on that a lot for different experiences.
So I want to go a little further, a little deeper on the physics integration with hand tracking, because something that I'm curious to know more is how are you guys straddling that line between intuitiveness and ease of use? For example, like in a particular application, for the first time or a couple times that I'm going to use it, it does make sense to be able to like open a door, grab it, and just like I would in the real world. But if this is a repeated motion that's going to happen over and over and over again, how, like, would it not make sense to sort of just like have a laser pointer and like just point at it and, press a button? Like, how do you straddle that line? Because, I can totally see the pros of having that extra immersion, but I can also feel the cons in that, like, oh man, this is just like real life. If I wanted to be in real life, I'd be in real life, like opening. So I'm just, how do you, what does that debate look like for you guys?
Go ahead, wait.
Okay, yeah, so it's one of the hardest problems to solve, right? Because something might be fun like 5 times, 10 times, and then it gets annoying. And it's very much what the experience you want to build. If it's for businesses, probably you should try to scale back on the immersiveness for making it ease of use, simpler and faster. But for other parts, it's really important that the immersion is there, that the presence feeling is there, to create like an immersive environment that you can create situations where maybe fear and panic should be induced. And so the more realistic you design it, the more likely is it that you maybe trigger that emotions in the brain to see how someone reacts in a more problematic situation. And it's really depends of what you want to build. And there's not like a golden rule, okay, that's how we do it in VR for everything. I think it's very important of what you think might be best fitting for the experience you are going for. And I wish I could give you like, okay, that is the thing everyone should use, but it's just not the case. It's in certain experiences, like when you remove that, the factor that you actually have to be careful of how you grab something, or that you can grab it in multiple different ways, and even though it's hard to implement, might add a lot to the experience. Whereas in others, like if you have a training, you don't want the user to spend 5 minutes of figuring out how to hold this. You just want to have a quick grab and do the task which needs to be there. But if you have surgeons, right, if you want to actually train the precise movement of that, maybe you need to have higher accuracy on how they hold their hands, how they hold the instrument, and simulate that very precisely, even though it's, so to speak, annoying. It would be easier if you just do this and it gets the slice done perfectly. That's not the goal of the application. It's actually to teach and to be careful about how you handle the instruments and that you can easily do mistakes. So it really depends of what is the goal of the application, what is the most important part of it. And then you have to make a design of what makes sense to do, what should be easy, what should be do with a simple menu and quick go-through, and what should be more interactive and immersive for the specific purpose of the application.
They actually made a really good speech about that for Half-Life Alyx. For example, the door opening. They really wanted that to be a non-event. Basically, you aim at the handle, you press a button, and it opens the door automatically. If you really have to handle it manually, then move and push the door, and you have to do that every time you want to go in a new room. It gets really annoying, frustrating, and if you move when you do that, you might like hit an object. So for those kind of operation where it's basically very clear what you want to do, you basically want to press the handle, push it down, and then open the door. So that you can basically automate in some way, but still make the user think, okay, I did that. I pushed my hand, even if my hand basically didn't move, I just put my hand there, pressed the button. Then if you see your hand actually doing the movement automatically, even if you don't do it yourself, your brain will basically get that as if it was doing it itself. And it should be done the same, depending, of course, on what kind of application, like Roger said. But if it's just like you want to interact with object, like grab cubes or do that, if in Hand Physics Lab, the first iteration, it was fully physics-based. So if you wanted to grab an object, you had like to slowly, precisely put your hands and then be sure that all the fingers were wrapping the object, and then you could grab it, and still it was not really like, it was fun, it was a fun experience, but it was not really reliable when you wanted to do something precise or quickly grab object, you couldn't do that. But now there will be a new snapping system which basically predicts in advance what's going to happen and how you're going to grab the object, automatically snap to it in a predefined pose. That's very useful for like specific tools, or for example a pencil. There is no like 5 different ways you can grab a pencil if you want to write. There is, for most people, only one way you can grab it. It's like between the thumb and the index, and then you can just pick it up quickly, you press a button, or you with hand tracking, you just like you make a grasping movement and the pen will automatically go there. It's of course still fully physics-based, fully immersive, but we basically help the user to like, we can guess what he's about to do, and we help him doing it so, but still we make it so that he think, okay, by doing a grasping gesture, it went into my hand, even though I didn't like precisely myself move the fingers to make it happen. It's basically the like the middle ground between like purely like realistically mapping what the user is doing with his fingers and trying to like guess what he's doing and helping him so that he has an easier time and a less frustrating time, especially because by purely using a physics simulation from like game engines, it's not very precise and perfect. So if you can really help the user to make the experience more pleasant and more stable, that's only beneficial.
Yeah, that actually, and actually, this is something that I wanted to sort of draw for you guys, because when I was trying out your experience, let's say, so here's a camera, so there's a hammer, right? And I remember there was a hammer, and I'm gonna draw a quick hammer here, and I wanted to grab the hammer, and I remember like struggling a little bit because it was definitely kind of because I was relying a lot on the physics. And immediately what I thought about was like, what if there was a sort of collider box right there that sort of shows me, oh, you want to make your hand in like an invisible shape, in that shape, and then all of a sudden it would sort of pull in the hammer towards me. Or I'm wondering, like, what sort of compromises are you making between this realism and, again, that ease of use?
So yeah, it's all about trying to predict what the user is gonna do. So it depends, because it could be done an easy way, like you approach your hand you have like a detector, you press grasping, and the hand will automatically go at the bottom of the hammer the way you expect it to. But what if you want to grab the hammer like the other way with the hand like this? Then it's more difficult. So you really need to try to predict. Okay, you detect along like the handle part where the hand is of the player when he's grabbing, and then we can. Let's imagine he grabs it here. It will, in real time, like detecting along that part where the hand is, and then attach the hammer to the hand, still in a very like dynamic way, so the user doesn't like really feel, okay, there is a system helping me, but I grabbed it myself. And then you need to detect for both hands which orientation of the hand, which angle you're from the hammer, and then you snap it this way. But it's not like a fixed position. It's really dynamic, but you still want to help the user to make him grab the hammer, but still in a dynamic way that he can, along the whole part, grab it. On the 2 different sides of the hand, you can grab it. And maybe, for example, you want to grab the upper part, we could have another system on top that will handle this part and help the user also define, okay, in that zone I want to grab it with my hand this side, or at the bottom I want to like do a grasping gesture from the bottom, but not like holding the handle like a normal hammer. It could be per object, different system you can try to use to really help the user having a pose for his hand that will help him grasp the object.
Well, this is really interesting, because what you're essentially saying is that and what's really cool is that you're being mindful in that, like, by making these compromises, you're also wanting to make sure that you're not limiting or constricting user freedom to enable them to use the sandbox like a sandbox. Like it's good you're thinking about those things.
So yeah, of course there will be that additional snapping system, but it's optional. By default, it will be active, because for most users, It's more pleasant to, okay, I want to grab that object, it goes into my hand. But maybe some people just want to be able to fully use only physics to interact with the object, and they don't want that if they try to grasp it this way, that it snaps this way. So yeah, to have the best of both worlds, we could have it like optional, and then you can define, okay, I want to be helped when grabbing an object, or I want to be fully free to interact any way I want with that object.
Roger, did you want to add something to that?
In the first iteration, like when we thought about not just doing pure physics grabbing, we had that the similar approach that you had just one position to grab an object. But then we had a dagger, and you really want to have stabbing motion, so that system doesn't work. But this then went all over the top, so that you could have a hammer and actually rotate it with grasping it with one hand, and then actually can rotate it, so it's fully dynamic. Because it adds a lot of freedom, especially like if you have a crowbar and other things. It's just so satisfying if you can slide along the crowbar and grab it any way you want. And I think it's not fully finished yet, but I think that system has a nice combination between the freedom of how you want to grab something and still provides you with a lot of help to actually do the action you want. The base up can be a little bit more help, or you have more freedom. And I think that is a good combination of the two. It's very complicated to get it to feel stable and work well, as Dennys can definitely attest to. But it's like a combination of the two worlds, where you have full physics or full like predefined poses. It's something in between. And I think that could be a really cool solution for many different applications. And we are basically experimenting with that. And then we want to get user feedback if that is a system which they feel like is usable in multiple different scenarios, or if just we think it's a really cool system, right? You always have to test and get as many users to give you feedback to be sure that you're on the right path.
Before I go forward and ask you a little bit more about how you conduct your user feedback sessions and things like that, I'm very curious to know about what it is that you're sort of uncovering and discovering in the form of human behaviors. And there's sort of this new uncharted realm. Like, what are you figuring out or learning about how people are using their hands in virtual reality and how they're reacting and all these things? Any insights that you might want to share on that?
Yeah, so one thing we really appreciated to see, because we made many different experiences and games which were more or less complex. Some of them were too complex because we were trying to use 2 buttons on the controller. And for new users, even for like people that already played VR, but especially for new users which are not used to like game pads or like video games in general, to be able to know where the buttons are, that's always complicated. But if you only have hand tracking, that's what we saw when we let people play Holoception, like people that were like friends or family, and that were not really familiar with VR, and we let them try Hand Physics Lab, and we saw didn't need to explain them anything. They could just like go in there, they saw their hands, and immediately they were just trying to do stuff like they would do in real life. They saw a button, okay, they can press on it. They see a cube or an object, okay, they can grab it, and they can just like intuitively, using what they know, how they interact in real life with their hands, and basically do the same in that virtual environment with like typical controllers or like those like laser pointer, and it's still something new they need to like get used to. Like, oh, there is a trigger, I need to aim, I can grab an object with that button, I need to move with the joystick. It's something new that they're not used to. But if they can just do stuff with their hands without having to think, okay, I need to press that button to do that, it's like the barrier of entry is really, really low. And that's really what we think is the future of VR, in some way, to have nothing in your hands, for most people and business application to just be able to interact with your hands, and that you intuitively can do stuff.
Yeah, we think especially like if you are more in a commercial environment, like, for businesses, having just the friction lowered of how to get into the experience and how to start doing things is very valuable. Also, that you only have to have one device powered up correctly, and if you have 20 headsets and you have 40 controllers lying around, then you mismatch them. It's just like the whole administration of things gets a lot easier. And we were extremely excited when the news came out that Qualcomm now is partnering up with Ultralead to get hand tracking directly on the Qualcomm chip. So it's very likely that more headsets will come out which support hand tracking in a sophisticated way, right? Because we finally have the industry like coming together and providing that not just for individual headsets, but actually probably for a broader range of all-in-one devices where those kind of inputs become more standardized. And yeah, as Dennis said, the most exciting part for us is always to see how easy you can bring someone into a VR experience when you use pure hand tracking. Whereas every time they have to take the controllers, they have some kind of inhibition because they say, I'm not a gamer, I don't want to have controls, but if they can use their hands, it just lowers the barrier of entry. And of course, the hand tracking is not perfect yet, right? We still have to figure out, okay, it doesn't track well if you have your hand up here, and those, you have basically a focal point where you can make the experience happen, and if you have to try to enforce that the user doesn't go beyond that, otherwise the tracking gets bad and then nothing works anymore. But I think it's the beginning, right? It's the first iteration of a widely accessible hand tracking feature where you don't have to add an additional device, you just have the Quest and then it works. And I think it's just the beginning where we see improvements on that and making the hand tracking better and better, and then we can do even more experience, because now we are still limited, right? If you have a Nerf gun in your hand and you shoot it, as soon as you go above a certain distance from your body, the tracking gets worse and you cannot track the index finger to, pull the trigger in a good way. And those things are still very limiting, but the breadth of possibilities are huge. But you need to define like whether UI and UX of how can you use that limited input of the hands to make actions possible. And it's still, we figure stuff out, and with double pinching, triple pinching, 4-type pinching and other things, because there's very limited things you can do, and you have to be very smart when you implement an application if you need a wide range of options and possibilities for people to interact. So with Hand Physics Lab, like the grabbing is not a button, it's just like you physically grab something.
Yeah, I can go on forever asking you questions about this, but we're gonna bring things to the last couple questions, if that's okay. Actually, I have one more before three more questions. What about using the hand? So if I look down at my hand and I like move my pinky in a certain way, what if that activates a radial menu around the hand, and all of a sudden I have access to point buttons and that? Like, have you guys thought about like what menus would look like and that sort of thing with hands, perhaps?
Like if you use the pinky finger, right, would have a menu. As soon as you put the alt in front of it to select something, you have, and already the menu is gone and flies around. So it's like, because you cannot have the hands in front of each other. A kind of menu which you have one hand on top of the other will just currently not work unless you have a third device, right, which tracks you from another perspective that you can do that. So you have to be very conscious to make maybe something where you hold the hand here and you have a menu here, which would be like a side menu, which comes out so you're sure that you not occlude one hand with the other, because that currently doesn't work. And there's all the tricks that you maybe, you activate something with one hand, but then it stays stationary and then you can interact with it. But it's so many times you think of, oh, that would be a really cool solution, and then the tracking actually is not good enough to handle it. And you have to basically experience it to understand why it gets so complicated, because sometimes it detects that you actually curled more than one finger, although you only curled the index finger, and those are still like little impurities which get better with every update. But for that, you have to be very conscious when you design something to really test, also especially with multiple users, because not everyone uses the hands perfectly, right? They do maybe they may be a little bit imprecise, they may be too fast, and there you have to get a large range of users being able to experiment with it until you know, okay, that UI will work for the majority of users.
But it's interesting that you raise that point, because people tend to like underestimate how the gaze input can be important and how you can prevent false positive to happen especially when you do hand tracking. Like that, basically you look at your hand and that you can easily know, okay, that hand is now facing me, and then you can do specific finger interaction to basically like open a menu or teleport or do something specific. But when you're interacting with stuff, you don't want that by accident. If I do a specific finger gesture, something will happen that I didn't expect. But as soon as you use interaction, you can easily prevent that, and then really only trigger some specific interaction event when you're actually looking at your palm, and then you do a specific interaction with the finger. And that is something really it's not used a lot currently with hand tracking, but it's really powerful if you use it right.
Wow. Well, thanks so much for that. You guys are true experts on this. Last couple questions now, down the wire. A little bit more about, I really do want to know more about how it is that you collect your user feedback And sort of what is the threshold when you want your users to try something out? Do you want 80% of them to have a positive experience? Do you want 70% to have a positive experience? Like, what is that percentage tell before you say, okay, it's good enough? I think we can put it out in the wild and see how it goes. Like, and again, how does that feedback loop look like overall?
Yeah. So we usually go through multiple stages, right? First, we do it. We have the fortunate situation that we have very critical people which work with us, so they will tell you very clearly when things don't work well. So that's very important, to be very open for criticism and communicating openly if you have multiple teams working on different projects, that you get good feedback from your own team. And then once you reach that stage, then you get it to family and friends, like people which are close to you, which know they will give you honest feedback. And we are fortunate that we have a lot of people which are very critical, which are very mean sometimes with giving feedback, but that's what you need. You need to be able to survive like the negative ones, because sometimes, you create something and it's like your baby and you're so happy about it, and it's very hard to sometimes absorb the criticism when you think you did something so amazing and they put out the flaws which is not working well. But you have to work through that, right? It's really hard sometimes, but you have to really focus and try to provide the best experience to those close group, which gives you honest feedback. And then the best thing is if you have a beta test, and it's very hard to get good beta testers to provide you really good feedback, and which test really the edge cases of what you do. But that's always a good thing. And for example, SideQuest is a very good way that you can distribute something to multiple Quest users, to provide you feedback with, even if you're in the early stages. And that helped us a lot to see that, hey, people really enjoy HPL to a degree which we didn't actually imagine in the beginning, that so many people have fun with it. I think that's very valuable if you get it out there and many people can try it and give you feedback. And then you have to make a call sometimes, okay, do we fully invest everything in it and make it a full-fledged product, or is it not good enough? And I think it's not a clear percentage. It's more also a gut feeling, right? Because it's still a very small community in VR. We have not 10 billion people like playing games every day. So sometimes it's a risk you have to take, and then you hope that it plans out in the end. Dennis?
Well, also something we discovered, especially with our other game, Holoception, we know that usually the loudest people do not represent the majority. Like, some people can complain about stuff, but we don't know what the majority of people think. That's why sometimes gathering data or making polls and then trying to really know what the majority wants or what they like or what they don't like is to not only focus on the loud people, because usually those are the ones that will give feedback all the time, but only negative feedback. And then we should not only focus on those loud people and negative feedback, but really on the broader picture.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's the hard part, right? Parsing out. Because what if 90% of people enjoy what you did, but there's 10% which are very loud and tell you every day how bad it is and you should change that in that way, and you might upset the 90 other percent which are just quiet, because if it's good then they often don't say anything. So that's a really big challenge if you don't gather the data of how much time they actually spend playing, etc. And I think those are very important to get, but it's not always easy to collect that data, that you have an objective view. And relying on feedback is great, but it's hard to judge how much someone played, which gives you so much bad feedback, and others which played maybe for hours never gave you any feedback, although you want them to give it to you. So that's why friends and family can sometimes really be important, because you can observe them and also see how they interact with. That's really important, that you observe someone else going through the experience you built without them giving any hints how to go through it, that you really get objective feedback. What is very valuable is if you can bring your users to make a video record of going through it, and just observing. We learned so much from observing users playing Holoception, for example, during the beta phase. We learned so much which wasn't working as we intended. When we see other people playing, I think that is very, very important.
Yeah, amazing. All right. Well, last question. I'm sure there are aspiring VR UX designers out there who would really want to get into space and start getting their hands dirty, but don't really know where to begin. And I'm sort of curious if you could perhaps provide sort of a blueprint or an overall picture of what your workflow looks like, what tools you use, and how you came about to getting to the point where you are. It's a big question, but, might as well.
Well, one of the main aspects is, of course, be curious, be willing to learn a lot, because when you're in the VR field, you need to learn everything. Basically, everything is new, everything which I don't know if you were like a web developer or developing on mobile. Basically, you have to learn to think differently, because developing stuff in 3D is something completely new. It's very close to developing like classical video games, but it's one step further, because you need to think about immersion, interaction, and everything that can go bad in VR, like motion sickness, all that. So definitely look into like learning a game engine like Unreal or Unity or Godot. And don't be afraid about coding, because as soon as you are able to do stuff, you can do stuff like where you have like toolkit and framework out there helping you to like teleport and use buttons and all that. But if you really want to like build something customized or like something like going a little bit further than the tools provided, you need to learn to code. And then as soon as you like because a lot of people really don't want to touch code. It's like, no, something they don't really want to get into. But if you really have like that step and then you get into it, you discover how much stuff you can actually do when you know how to code and how to like put and script your ideas and what you want to build, really, that you can build everything to yourself scratch.
I think one important part is that when you want to go into the spatial computing domain right now, you're basically a pioneer, right? You're sailing a ship which doesn't know exactly where it's going to go, and there's a lot of things which are not solved yet, which gives you a lot of inspiration to maybe think differently or find new ways to solve it. In mobile phones, basically a lot of patterns have been well test proven and their work. We still, if you talk to even the big corporations, they still have a hard time solving things which might be obvious in a user's mind, but as a developer, you still know, okay, a solution for those interactions. So basically, you're part of a pattern group which tries to solve the new spatial computing, which is still in early stages, right? We have so many control iterations. Now it comes Hamtramck. Every year there's the paradigm shifts and you find new things. So it's a perfect time to get into if you're really motivated by getting a challenge and figuring stuff out and coming up with new ideas to help to write the book of how UX interactions will be in the future for the new spatial computing domain. And the best thing is, a game engine is really required. I think it's if you use Unreal or Unity or Godot, we have no preference. We chose to use Unity. But many others have amazing tools as well. It's just what we felt comfortable with at the time, and we are still very happy to use it. It has a fast iteration cycle. You can quickly press play and inspect things, so that helps a lot. And of course, either you are maybe more a 3D designer or like, a modeler or an artist there or a programmer. But if you want to push the boundaries hard and iterate fast and really understand the whole range of things, if you can combine artistic talent with programming or implementing stuff, that is highly valuable at the moment, because then you can go quickly through iterations. You don't need to talk to 5 different people until you can test the prototype. You can do a lot of things yourself, and I think that's highly valuable at the current time where the book is still written of how we do certain things, like locomotion still hasn't been solved in a way that it works for everything. It's still, we have like wheels of trying to do it, but we still have not found the solution which works for everything to get no one motion sick. And so there, I think the more you are not afraid of code, or even start with simple tutorials, right, where you just throw a little ball in a room and you play around with physics in VR, is a lot of fun. And just get started with very simple. Don't think about too much into the future of where it's gonna lead you. Just try to play around with VR and understand the medium better, because we made a lot of mistakes. We made a lot of prototypes, we experimented a lot, and had to learn a lot until we now can easier judge a project or already imagine things a lot better, and we fail less often than we did in the beginning. And that's important to learn. Don't be afraid to fail, or things don't work out as you imagine. Don't get frustrated. It's completely normal. It's a new domain, and you have to learn a lot of new things until you get really proficient in it and can judge ideas even from a whiteboard that you already know, okay, that will not gonna work because I already are sufficiently experienced. But it takes time, and don't worry about it.
Well, gentlemen, this has been a really enlightening conversation. How can people stay in touch and follow up with all the things and exciting projects you're working on these days?
Well, we have a Discord channel, so we can maybe give you the link, so you can also put it in, probably in your description of the video. And we have several Twitter accounts, we have a website, but we are the most active in our Discord community.
Perfect. So,
especially if people want to directly ask questions there, we're always eager to, help fellow developers or just have a communication about the VR space and how it evolves and the future and what it holds.
Amazing. Yeah, I'll make sure all those links are in the show notes of either the YouTube description or on the podcast. And check out the Virtual Hand Interaction Lab on itch.io as well. Thank you. I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks to you for hosting us. It was really great to be here.
Yeah.
It was fantastic being in your huge apartment. It's still fascinating.
And the view is quite...
Oh, big credit, big shout out to, let me double check. I want to make sure I give a shout out to, I know, one second, Lucifer M. Star. Lucifer M. Star, the creator of this world, whoever you are out there, you beautiful soul, thank you for making this place and allowing other people like us, use it for these purposes. Once again, thanks so much for your time, guys, and I'll see you later. Peace.